Hi, I'm Gavin Woods from Aurion Learning. Welcome to the latest episode of Aurion Learning Leaders. Today I am joined by Joan Keevill. Hi, Joan.
Hiya.
Joan is current chair of the eLearning Network and has also worked as part of the Aurion team on different projects through the years, as well as working independently with clients. Joan, it's great to have you. We're asking everybody a set series of questions that they're answering from their perspective. But perhaps before we start, you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your journey in learning to date.
Okay, sure, happy to do that, and thanks for having me. So yes, as you said, I'm the chair of the eLearning Network at the moment, which is it's a network for anybody in L&D in the industry in learning and development, but also specialising in e-learning. We have quite a big reach across social media, so 19,000 followers on Twitter, for example, and we are a virtual network, a not-for-profit network, as well as running events. But of course, like everybody else at the moment, we can't do any events, so we're doing lots and lots of different things online to try and reach out to people who are really struggling in these difficult times. So I've worked in the learning industry probably most of my life, really. I began as a teacher. And then I moved into the BBC and worked there for about 18 years before leaving there just over 10 years ago and setting up my own business. So I do a mix of consultancy and e-learning design, scripting, that kind of thing.
Okay. You happy to get started with our first set question? Okay, so we talk about learning that works at Aurion. But my question is, what does learning that works mean to you?
It's obvious to me. I would say maybe not obvious to everybody. It's for a start, it needs to be centered on the learners themselves, and it has to be focused on addressing some kind of business problem. And the whole point of learning that works is whoever's designing it or commissioning it or creating it or whatever, they've actually taken the time to look at the business and say, what is the business problem? What are the individuals struggling with? What problems are you trying to solve for them? And then actually, feed that into the whole design. So for me, that would be doing things like scenarios that resonate with learners, because it focuses on the problems that they're actually struggling with in the business or at work. And then it's challenging them to consider their current behavior or attitude or whatever, and getting them to think, well, actually, is what I do now good enough? Do I need to change and do something different? And if the learning if it's working, then the learning will be a mechanism by which people can make those changes in their behaviour and their attitude and build their knowledge. And the business ought to be able to measure that change in the business itself, amongst the learning population, and know that it's had an impact, which is a lot more than just being able to tick a box that somebody's completed a course, for example. So.
Do you think that's an area that's oft neglected, Joan? That impact?
If you look at compliance in particular, and I've done a lot of compliance e-learning and face-to-face as well, actually, I think the regulators tend to drive a lot of it, and therefore the organisation is looking at tracking completion. So they're looking at input data, and they're not necessarily looking at output data. And even if you say to them, look, you can join this up a little bit to what they're doing in the job itself by perhaps asking managers to do some follow-up discussion. You've now done all this e-learning. Let's talk as a team about what's different or what we need to really focus on. And they actually might come back and say, well, yes, we quite like that idea, but we couldn't possibly make our managers do that, and we wouldn't know if they'd done it anyway. So if we can't measure it, there's no point.
Yeah.
That's the point where you kind of think, are you really developing your leaders and your managers? Because you know what? It's a shared responsibility. You can't just ask the learning and development department to push out a course and then expect that to change everything. It's got to be a partnership with the business itself and all the way through the kind of chain of command, if you like.
Absolutely. Learning experience or a learning experience, you see that buzzword about a lot at the moment, Joan. Maybe from the learner perspective, when you think about the actual solution itself, what do you think makes a good learning experience?
I think relevance is key. I think it's got to be meaningful. And I think you've also, as I've mentioned it already, you've really got to be getting people to think. So think about whatever's in the e-learning itself. So you're not just pushing facts across and transmitting information to people. That might be part of it, but it shouldn't be the only part. You're actually getting people to think about, well, what is your existing mental model? What do I think about this current task, example, situation, whatever approach? And are you telling me then that I've got to change because I hadn't really thought I needed to, but now I need to then work out why, how, all those interesting questions. And if you can engage people in that kind of thinking and reflection is really powerful. Reflection is what gets you to think, that isn't what I should be doing anymore. I need to start doing this. And then you've got a powerful learning experience. So it's all about the examples you choose, getting to know. I mean, I did a project with Radio Belfast, actually, when I was in the BBC, Radio Ulster, rather, in Belfast. And, we were looking at leadership. And we just I talked to individuals on the team and said, what are you struggling with? And then we created some scenarios that were picking up on those challenges. And when we came to, get them to discuss the scenarios, they all said, well, this is so like what I have to deal with every day. And it's like, yeah. That's what makes a good yeah. But that particular example was a workshop, but it's the same when you're doing it as e-learning. It's got to trigger something that makes them really think about what am I doing here? What are you saying I need to do differently?
Yeah. So that's one challenge there in Radio Ulster. Would you have another you'd be able to share with us, Joan, where you've tackled a significant challenge with learning and the results you were able to get?
Well, I did another piece of work in the BBC itself when I was in BBC training, when we were looking at leadership, because it's a long time ago now, but then the BBC was outsourcing a lot of HR operational tasks, and they were kind of cutting back on the people embedded in the business, and they wanted leaders themselves to take more responsibility. But we knew that the culture in the organisation at that time was that people were not terribly interested in listening to an HR or learning person telling them what they should do differently. So we came up with the idea of going out and filming people who were leaders already established across the business. And in fact, we came and we filmed at BBC Belfast. We went to Wales and Scotland and around the regions in England. And we found different people, like the leader of the team at Radio 1, the controller of Radio 1. And when we talked about how do you manage people effectively, he said, well, actually, I do. I'm very open. I want to be approachable. So we do have a monthly pizza lunch every, to get together, etc. The fact that we videoed those people and asked them specific questions, a bit like you're doing now, meant that we could then, cut together all these different perspectives on a given issue, like how do you manage change, which is very relevant now, or how do you manage performance. We could cut between those people, giving snippets of their experience, the challenges they face, how did they deal with them, and what advice would they have for other people. And that went down really, really well, because people liked the peer-to-peer approach that we took there. That went into an e-learning package. We divvied it up into short modules. We gave them some add-on activities that they could work through. And actually, we won an award as well for that one. So that was back in a long time ago now, 2008. But that was good fun.
And I know you've been involved, Joan, actually on the judging panel of awards.
Yes, since 2011.
Yeah, don't you know the ingredients then it takes to get the full rounded picture?
Yeah, what's really important, and I don't just judge compliance, although I do quite often because it's my background, a lot of it, but what's really important is being able to demonstrate that impact that you've had with the learning. And so many people, I guess it's just the way they tend to operate, they can have the most brilliant project, but if all they focus on is the inputs, and they can't really come along and say, and this is the result of what happened, then we can't award them the marks across the board that would lift them right up to the top of the pile. And the best examples are ones where you get to see the project. You can see that there's really good design, graphic design, good interactions, but you can also hear from people who've actually said, this turned us around, this made a big difference. We had the before, we've had the after, we can measure the gap that we were able to cover, that kind of thing. And that's what makes the winning projects really powerful.
So it's not just thinking you have learning that works, it's being able to prove it.
Yes, demonstrating the impact, yeah.
So when we think, let's say we've gone through the right process, we've created a solution there, for a particular challenge. Would you have any tips or practical steps for an organisation can put in place to promote learning?
I think if I can refer you back to an example from last year's awards, which was a bank that won silver in our awards, Learning Technologies, and gold in another set of awards. They had a package of learning resources, like an opening video. They were doing a code of conduct, and they had an opening video which actually challenged people personally on their ethical standards and values, and then extrapolated from that to the workplace environment. And they had e-learning and other things, but what they wrapped that all up in was a kind of marketing and communications plan. And I think we can learn a lot from internal marketing, external marketing people as well. So, a little promotional video that goes out the network, across the network, or maybe it's a poster campaign or different things like that. You can raise a lot of awareness by taking that sort of campaign approach, just laying the groundwork before you roll the learning out, or the e-learning out. And then I think, you can then actually get the water cooler conversations going, and you can get peer-to-peer recommendations. That's when you really start to find that golden egg, where the learning is making an impact on people such that they want to talk about it amongst each other, and share that success, if you like. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think learning can learn a lot from how we all buy things. I know if I ever have to get a plumber, I'll definitely go with the person my friend says, it was a good experience, good service.
Do we have that option in some of our learning management systems to do the like that you get on Facebook, or the retweet that you can do on Twitter? Because I think people value other people's opinions. If I know that I'm working with you and you know your stuff and you've done brilliant stuff before, if you tell me something is good, I'll be much more likely to look at it than if somebody I don't know recommends it to me.
Yeah, absolutely. What advice, Joan, would you give to someone within an organisation who wants to develop a reputation as being a learning leader?
Well, firstly, Gavin, I think I would challenge that idea about developing a reputation, because I think it's more important for that person to develop themselves as a learning leader, as opposed to just working on the reputation, because I think the reputation will follow if they're doing good stuff. I've met various people in different contexts, including, for example, at Henley Business School, where I've worked on a Masters in Leadership program. And I think what you can see is that leaders in learning are not afraid to be innovative. They can articulate a vision. A lot of this is generic leadership skills and competencies, but it applies to learning as well. So not being afraid to try new things, really doing an audit of what's working and what's not, and then potentially ditching stuff that's not working. But it's also about creating and communicating, articulating that vision. Is learning, I can liken it, there's a couple of, there's a model I can liken it to, is the learning and development department a grocery store selling courses on demand and therefore being quite reactive? Or are they much more like engineers who sit at the top table and shape the organisation because they know what the organisational vision is, and they then know what skills and competencies the population needs, the employees need to be able to deliver that vision. And the learning leader who is effective will be having those conversations at the top table and working out how they can then bring those changes about in the employees. And I think, like any other effective leader, they'll be building trust, they'll be communicating well. When I say innovative, they'll be trying out different formats. So they might be doing video snippets. I mean, everybody's doing video nowadays, aren't they? That kind of thing. So not just the old-fashioned approach of what is the course that you need? Yes, I can get that to you in 2 or 3 months' time. I think there's another aspect of that around, again, speaking with the leadership point of view in mind, that leadership in a crisis may need to be, very directive, but in normal times, which hopefully we'll get back to soon, leadership is a shared responsibility, and it's more democratic, and it can come from the bottom up and it can go out sideways. So every individual could be a potential leader. So how are your potential leaders in the team? What are they contributing to bring that vision to life? And even what about outside the team? Because you've got things like user-generated content. If you've got experts across your business, can you capture what they know and bring that into the curated learning offering? It's quite a lot of ideas.
That's a big thing that we spend a lot of time on, Joan, with some of our projects is, look at what you have. You'd be surprised at how much you have within your own organisation. Not everything has to be curated. It just needs to be, captured in some way. That's the end of our set questions, Joan, but maybe throw a wild card one at you.
Go for it.
I know you've been involved in, compliance and blended learning programs with face-to-face delivery in different countries around the world. Are there any universal truths you see when you work in those countries, or anything that surprises you about how either the learning goes down or the delivery modes, things like that?
Well, I've delivered face-to-face learning around the world, in Asia and India, the States and everything. And there are cultural differences. I think, and one of our industry partners in the eLearning network is actually a translation agency, Comtech. And they're very hot on cultural sensitivity. I think that links back to what I was saying about relevance and being meaningful. Because there's a classic example in compliance training. If you are delivering compliance training into China, don't refer to red flags as warning signs, because red is, it has a completely different meaning over there. So it's about having that sensitivity, translating where you need to. I mean, not everybody wants to translate because English is the working language, but sometimes it's easier for people to assimilate the learning if it's in their own language. But I think, again, it's just about having meaningful examples and having good learning design that gets people thinking, and ideally having that connection through the team to the team leader to the more senior managers, so that the learning is part of a journey that takes people from where they are now. But the learning isn't just done in a vacuum, but it's actually part of a journey where you then have to think, what have I learned? How am I going to apply that to make a difference in my job? And I think it's that seeing it not just as a one-off, a drop in the ocean, but as part of a whole journey that people are on.
I think that's a good note to finish on. So thanks for your time today, Joan.
Welcome.
For those watching, this is the latest episode in Aurion Learning Leaders series. You'll be able to find more on our social channels and on our website. Thanks a lot.